Renting in Quebec isn't simple, but knowing your rights is vital. What power do you have when renting from a new landlord or even an old one? The province recently passed new housing legislation, so we broke down some of the changes you may have missed and what you can do if you find yourself in a tricky situation. Are lease transfers allowed? It depends on your landlord. Up until recently, a building owner had to prove they had serious concern about a potential tenant to refuse a lease transfer. Bill 31 changed that. Now they can do it for any reason. So what happens if you see an ad for a lease transfer? One lawyer I spoke with recommends being skeptical. It doesn't mean that the transfer won't happen, but it could be a gamble. Can a landlord ask you to pay a deposit? They can only ask you for 1 month in advance, but additional fees like security deposits or a key deposit are illegal. Also, a landlord cannot ask you for post-dated checks. But remember, these rules are not enforceable with the Quebec Housing Administrative Tribunal unless there's a signed lease. This lawyer says there's something you can do.
If you can pay the amount, because it's illegal and because it's against public order, if you pay it, that doesn't mean you're admitting that it's okay to do that. So what people can do is pay the amount and then sign the lease, get your lease signed, and then ask the landlord to reimburse you.
So if you haven't yet signed the lease, you do still have some recourse. Housing advocates say if you believe you're being discriminated against, you can file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission.
They don't have any enforcement capabilities, but they can contact landlords rapidly, and sometimes the pressure of that does work on occasion.
Can a landlord kick you out for renovations? No. The province recently adopted a moratorium on evictions for things like transforming a space into commercial, making it bigger, or dividing it up. Now, a landlord can temporarily displace you if the unit needs major repairs. They need to demonstrate that those repairs are absolutely necessary, like there's a problem with the structure of the building. If you need to get out for less than a week, your landlord needs to give you at least 10 days notice. If it's going to take longer than that, they have to let you know at least 3 months in advance. Here's something important though. The landlord needs to cover the cost of your stay elsewhere and storage if necessary. The moratorium on rent evictions will remain in place for 3 years or until the housing pressure eases. Do I have to accept my rent increase? You can reject an increase and renew your lease, but make sure you respond in writing. After that, your landlord has 1 month to negotiate or ask the Housing Administrative Tribunal to set the rent. The tough decision will be based on taxes and whether there was work done in the building. While that wheel is in motion, the current rent needs to be maintained. Experts recommend getting as much documentation as you can. Ask your landlord for expense receipts and do your own calculations before you reject the increase. The tribunal could decide you're not paying enough rent. Does your landlord have to show you the previous tenant's rent? Yes, your landlord has to show you the lowest rent paid over the last year. You should be able to find that in Section G of your lease. If you discover that your landlord is charging you more than the previous tenant, you can negotiate. If you can't come to an agreement, you have 10 days after signing the lease to ask the TEL to set the rent. What happens if you realize your landlord left Section G empty? The time is ticking, but you have 2 months to ask the TEL to do something about it. There are exceptions. The landlord does not have to disclose the previous rent if you're moving into affordable housing, new building, or an apartment that was not previously rented. If you need help navigating the complexity of finding a place to rent here in Quebec, you can always go to your local housing committee. If you risk ending up with absolutely nowhere to go, many municipalities, including Montreal, have a special 311 line for housing assistance. All of this is a lot of information, but knowing your rights and the resources available can help. And don't forget, you're not in this alone.
People are waiting a long time for social housing. On average, it takes between 4 and 6 years to get an apartment with the OMHM. That's a group responsible for social housing in the city. Right now, there's about 16,000 applicants on the wait list. Many of them are families. I spoke with some community groups who say that people are desperate, that with the cost of living going up, people can't afford rent without social housing.
They get discouraged. They really get discouraged. And it's hard to witness, it's hard to see. Most of the time they will apply somewhere else. They will either find something else in the meantime. A lot of them will also fall through the cracks.
And when people get into social housing, they still run into problems. Last week, the city's Auditor General released a report that slammed the state of social housing in Montreal. The report highlighted a lack of inspections and a lack of repairs. These buildings were rated on a scale from A to E. A being brand new constructions, to D being in poor condition, to E being in very poor condition. And Montreal ranked at the bottom of that rating. 61% of social housing buildings in Montreal got D or E ratings. Stéphane is one of the people who lived in one of those buildings in Hochelaga.
2012, ils ont eu de condamnation des murs. Là, ils ont décidé qu'ils nous mettaient toute la gang dehors. Je suis un des premiers partis de là. Puis là, j'ai demandé si je pouvais revenir dans mon logement. Ils m'ont dit oui, ça prendrait 18 mois.
Well, it's been 12 years and he still hasn't been allowed back. That building is completely closed off and has been sitting empty for years. And we spoke with some other residents who live in some other social housing units. They complained of similar issues of cockroaches, of holes in the wall, and of mold. But they feared repercussions for speaking out on camera. But they said that it could take months for their landlord, the city, to do anything.
We are running the risk that the city, if not correct these housings, will be considered a slum landlord. You cannot have the city chasing regular landlord and believing that, or telling them that they must fix their housing while the city itself is in a point of negligence.
The OMHM says they've received $250 million from the provincial and federal governments. They say that's more money than they've received in the past. And a spokesperson says that money will go towards renovating buildings.
The funding is now there, and that gave us the opportunity to also do a lot more projects. So we're at a rate of 150 projects per year.
He says they filter through that long wait list to make sure that everyone on that list still needs housing. They're hoping that with continuous investment from the provincial and federal government, they'll be able to meet the ever-growing demands.
More than 300 households have already called the City of Montreal's helpline in need of a place to stay ahead of moving day. The housing crisis has been raging for years, but some renters have told me that this year the rental market is just brutal. Landlords illegally asking for more than 1 month's deposit, unaffordable housing, and just rampant forms of discrimination. I spoke with one woman who has been spending hours and hours every day looking for an apartment for her and her autistic son.
I went on Facebook Marketplace. I've been through louer.com, Kijiji.
You have to write like who you are, what are you about, what are you looking for. You don't smoke, you don't do drugs. But then as soon as you say social aid, as soon as you say autistic child or just a child, they say no.
Montreal's Municipal Housing Office says it's got an emergency service to help people like Akerlee find a home. If you're at risk of ending up on the street, you can call 311. An agent will analyze your case and support you in your search. People with low income and in other vulnerable situations are a priority. Akerlee says she has reached out to them, but it hasn't been easy.
I called 211. 211 said, no, you need to call 311. So I called 311. They tell me, call 211. I was almost crying then, and I was like, okay, don't crack, keep going. So then they gave me resources, and all of them are like, we're full, and we do have a waiting list, but we're not taking anyone else because it's full.
The Municipal Housing Office says no one will end up on the street. If you really can't find a place to live by the end of your lease, the city will find you temporary emergency shelter. It can also cover the cost of moving and storage of your belongings.
It's good that those emergency services are in place.
But this community organizer says some people just slip through the cracks.
They're staying with friends, they're staying with family members, they're crashing on couches, where maybe they're not on the street, but for all intents and purposes, they are still unhoused. They are still in tenuous situations. They still do not have access to long-term housing, and those are often people in situations that the city is not helping.
Darwish says the long-term solution to this housing crisis is more structural changes. They include rent control, more stricter rules against rent evictions, and more social housing.
Every year on July 1st, hundreds of tenants in Quebec are out of a home. So if you or someone you know could be in that situation soon, there are resources that you can call to try and find a place to live. They're called Service d'aide à la recherche de logement. But how is that different from you searching on Kijiji or Marketplace? Their services can help you apply for subsidies. For example, if you're eligible, one of those programs could allow you to spend no more than 25% of your income on rent. If you don't find a home in time, they can put you in a hotel temporarily or help you find storage. These housing services try to offer solutions on a case-by-case basis. Maybe you risk being homeless because you're dealing with domestic violence, or maybe your landlord is kicking you out. They can point you to the right group so you can get help. They'll give you the info you need, but housing is scarce, and groups say that waiting lists for subsidies and other programs are long.
When you're in a context where there is a major need for affordable housing, first, the dwellings that are available are not necessarily affordable, and second, there's going to be a lot of people who are asking for the same thing.
The Service d'aide à la recherche de logement has about 40 offices across Quebec, and they may operate differently depending on where you are. The province is putting up $7.8 million to help them meet tenants' needs. That will help cover those hotel and storage costs. But just know that thousands of people have already reached out for help. So if you're in a tough spot, it's better that you call them sooner rather than later.
Oh, an eviction notice. Yay, it's that time of year again. The holidays are over, and you may have received a notice from your landlord that you'll have to leave your home come July. If so, here are your options. You can leave and try out your luck on the rental market. Should be fun. Or you can refuse. In Quebec, you have 1 month to do so after receiving your notice. It works differently for evictions and repossessions. For an eviction notice, it's up to the tenant to bring a refusal form to the housing tribunal, which is known as the TAL. For repossessions, you can simply deliver your refusal notice to your landlord. Forms to refuse like this one and this one can be found on the TAL's website. It's then up to the landlord to prove that they have a legitimate reason to kick you out. Renovations, wanting to move in, or have a family member take over. If you find out your landlord lied to kick you out, you can open a case at the TAL and demand compensation, but it's up to you to prove it. Before you sign anything, housing committees recommend you reach out to them first. If you want to know more, head to our website.
50,000 tons. That's how much trash accumulates on the streets of Montreal around moving day. To put that into perspective, that's about equivalent to the weight of 333 blue whales. It's a miracle that the city isn't covered in trash. Alright, so maybe the city is partially covered in trash. Things can be left out on sidewalks and in front of lawns for weeks at a time. And this happens every moving day. So, shouldn't the city have its curbside collection figured out by now?
The days following the moving day represent quite a challenge for our crew. In fact, we will have hundreds of employees working during the next 2 coming weeks in order to grab all those items that people will left behind.
Every borough in Montreal has its own rules for curbside collection, but they're mostly all the same.
When it comes to bulky items, you can leave out small electronics, certain appliances, and non-upholstered furniture. So that can be a toaster, a wooden bed frame, a kitchen stove with the door removed, and even plumbing fixtures like a toilet or tub. Now, for things that cannot be left out on the curb, air conditioners, refrigerators, large electronics like TVs, hazardous waste, and a bunch of other stuff. You can't just ditch that stuff on the side of the street. Instead of the curb, you'll have to drop these items off at an eco-center. It unfortunately won't be recycled unless you go to the one in Saint Laurent. That's because the eco-center there has a pilot project to try and recycle things like mattresses and electronics. But some feel these rules may not be enough, and maybe the City of Montreal should put out a reminder on how to throw things out ahead of moving day.
It should be done weeks before July 1st, in order just to remind people that they should take care of the garbage they plan to throw away on July 1st, to take care of them a month before or weeks before.
One group, with support from the Plateau Montreal borough, has taken upon themselves to try and clear out what's on the streets. They call themselves Rebut Recu. It's an initiative that rides around and picks up items that would otherwise end up curbside. Instead, they sell it to residents.
They can pay what they can, what they want, and the rest is redistributed to charities in connection with people in need.
To give stuff away, all you have to do is sign up online and volunteers will ride over on bikes equipped with wagons. They have several locations, and we got a chance to check out the container at Rachel and Fulum.
Dinner is going to be pretty much full in the following days. We will still put things out for the garage sale, but yeah, it's going to get full.
Sometimes the best solution is to just find someone who will take your stuff. Montreal is known for thrifting and swapping, and it might just help our city look a little bit cleaner around moving day.
Abandoned buildings, dark alleyways, tunnels, and fenced-off areas near highways. The City of Montreal has dismantled hundreds of homeless encampments in the past year. But after the tents come down, where are the people who were living there ending up?
See how there's now a new piece of mesh? Yeah. They would go through the fence and down, way to the end.
These are the kind of places David Chapman searches, trying to find those he's lost track of.
They learn that in order to survive, they need to hide better. And so they go in search of abandoned buildings, they go in search of dark alleyways.
Montreal has intervened in 460 homeless encampments in the past year of varying sizes. One of them, the encampment under the Ville-Marie Expressway. Chapman's been following those who were evicted. Several, he says, were housed, but others?
They've hidden so well, I have no idea where they are, and we haven't seen them at Resilience for some time. And one person in particular has died of an overdose.
We don't know how many people living on the streets have died. That's not a number the city or the province keeps track of. But with the warmer weather coming, frontline workers are expecting more encampments, meaning unique challenges with high stakes and no easy solutions.
To give that person a chance and different options, because I think that people who live there, they kind of thinking that they have no other options.
He says more 24-hour shelters would be useful so people find permanent housing. Chapman says the city also needs to stop taking down some encampments to prevent people from getting into increasingly dangerous situations.
It's a safer alternative for the city to allow a few places where encampments could exist with maybe some bathrooms and a sink to wash, and just a few very, very basic health supplies.
The City of Montreal would not do an interview with us on the story, but it did send us a statement saying it takes down encampments for safety issues and that in all cases it's done in a humane way. The city also said it won't be keeping track of the number of people who died who are experiencing homelessness, saying that's the province's responsibility. The province, for its part, says it's not counting either. It says it's up to the city to decide to dismantle an encampment and that preventing and reducing homelessness is a shared responsibility.